Someone is standing in the garden. Midnight. Dark cloak. And they're pointing something at her window. Something that glows. I'm watching from the windowsill. 4 paws. Wet nose pressed against the glass. Tail that won't stop moving no matter what I tell it. From the outside, I look like a 6-week-old puppy who just wants to play. From the inside, I'm the creature that made gods change direction when they saw me coming. The figure in the garden raises the artifact higher, whispers something. The glow intensifies, and I feel it. Dark, woven, layered magic aimed directly at the girl sleeping 10 feet behind me. She has no idea. She's been sleeping for 2 hours, completely trusting. She named me Hu. She bought me from a market stall for a handful of copper coins. She thinks I'm her pet. I think I'm the only thing standing between her and something she doesn't even know exists yet. We're both right. Let me back up. Because the story of how I ended up on a pink silk pillow with ruffles, yes, ruffles, is something you need to hear. My name is Kay. My real name you can't pronounce. The last person who tried lost their head, not metaphorically, literally. 1 second it was there, next second it wasn't. I'm not human. Never was. I've existed in this world since before the gods finished building it, back when they were still figuring out how mountains were supposed to work. Armies ran when they heard my name. Gods avoided eye contact. Kings sent tribute without being asked because the alternative was significantly worse for everyone involved. And then I did something stupid. I did something that no ancient world-ending monster should ever do. I felt sorry for a village full of farmers. There was a rift, a tear between worlds, massive and unstable, sitting on top of a mountain while nightmare creatures poured through it into this world. The gods came to me. The god of light himself showed up, which, for context, is like your country's president personally knocking on your door. He was very polite. Too polite. I should have noticed that. "Only you can seal it, Great K," he said, and his voice was only shaking a little. "Your power is the only thing that can close it permanently." I could have said no. I almost did. And then I looked down at the village below the mountain. Normal people, farmers, a woman hanging laundry, kids running between the houses. They were looking up at the rift with the kind of fear that gets into your bones. And something in me, something I don't like to acknowledge exists, decided that was enough. So the most feared creature in existence walked into a dimensional tear because of laundry and children playing. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain. Closing the rift was easy. I walked in, compressed my power into a single strike, and slammed it shut from the inside. Clean. Elegant. Exactly how I like things. The problem was that I didn't make it out before it closed. The space collapsed around me in less than a second. The last thing I heard was the gods exhaling with relief. They thought they were finally rid of me. They actually exhaled. Thousands of years of tension, gone. How deeply, deeply optimistic of them. I didn't die. Things like me don't die from something as simple as a dimensional collapse. But I lost my form, my massive, terrifying, mountains tremble when I move form, completely gone. My consciousness survived, my power survived, compressed down to the size of an ember buried under ash, and my body turned out to be something else entirely. Small, soft, 4 legs. I opened my eyes and saw a wooden floor. I tried to stand up. I fell over. Me, the creature that has never once stumbled in thousands of years, fell over because I hadn't figured out 4 legs yet. If the gods were watching from wherever gods watch things, they were absolutely laughing. I genuinely hope it was worth it to them. A white puppy with black spots on its ears, 6 weeks old, sitting in a cage at a market stall with a price tag that was genuinely insulting, given who was inside it. My power was still there. I could feel it, like coals deep underground, buried and inaccessible. This body wasn't built to contain SSS-Rank energy. You can't pour the ocean into a teaspoon. It needed time. The body needed to grow and adapt before it could hold even a fraction of what I actually am. How long? I didn't know. Months. Maybe longer. Irritating. But I don't panic. I've survived 3 separate apocalypses and 1 very bad century. I can survive a cage, a price tag, and wounded dignity. 2 people approached my cage. A man in his 40s with an expensive coat, and the expression of someone who had better places to be. And a girl, 17 years old, dark hair in an elaborate updo, clothes that said old money, violet eyes that were looking at me in a way nobody else in that market was. Everyone else saw a puppy. Cute. Sellable. She looked at me like she was seeing something the others weren't, like there was a question in her eyes that she couldn't quite form. Interesting. Lady Wei Lin, the man beside her said in the tone of someone who had learned to hide his sighing. This puppy is entirely ordinary. Perhaps a purebred would be more. This one, she said, no hesitation, no explanation offered. The tone of someone who has never once in their life had to say something twice. She crouched down to my cage. Up close I could see it. Under the perfect posture and the composed expression, something heavier was sitting. Exhaustion, maybe, or something heavier, the kind that builds up slowly and sits between the shoulder blades. She reached in and scratched behind my ear. And here's the part I'm not proud of. My tail wagged, on its own, without my permission. This body has opinions about being scratched that have nothing to do with my dignity and everything to do with being 6 weeks old. Traitorous body, that's how I ended up in the Wei household, and that's where things started getting interesting. Let me explain who Wei Lin actually is, because who she is according to this empire's high society and who she actually is are two completely different things. Wei Lin is the daughter of Duke Wei, one of the most powerful men in the Kai Empire. Beautiful, sharp, with a spine made of something harder than most people's entire skeletons, according to everyone who talks about her, a villainess. She supposedly poisoned 3 rivals competing for the crown prince's attention, drove a court lady to tears at a banquet simply by looking at her. Once reportedly made an entire household staff resign with a single 10-minute conversation. Nobody confirmed the details. Nobody denied them either. High society doesn't like her. They fear her, sure. A few respect her. But like? No. She gets called cold, ruthless, the villain of every story she appears in. I spent my first week in her house pretending to sleep while listening to servants talk. Animals make excellent eavesdroppers. Nobody edits themselves around a puppy. Here's what I actually learned. Wei Lin is 17, engaged to Crown Prince Lan Chen since childhood, a political alliance between great houses, arranged before either of them had opinions about it. Prince Lan Chen, handsome and brilliant by all accounts, has developed feelings for someone else, a girl named Su Mei, daughter of a minor official. Kind heart, rare magical gift, sweet smile, classic setup. Cold, wealthy fiancé versus warm, humble girl with a good soul. And the court has absolutely no confusion about which side it's on. I listened to all of this and thought, interesting, because what I was watching every single day looked nothing like the reputation. With other people, yes. Wei Lin ran cold. Voice even, expression controlled, no excess emotion shown to anyone for any reason whatsoever. But in the evenings when the servants were gone and it was just her and me in her room, she took the mask off entirely. She'd sit on the floor next to my pillow, lean against the bed, and just talk. No audience, no performance, just words she apparently had nowhere else to put, sometimes small things. Her father ignored her input in a council meeting again. A dress she didn't choose is already sewn. The soup was too salty. Again. And sometimes things that were a lot heavier than soup and dresses. Things that clearly had nowhere else to go. One night, 3 days in, she sat very still for a long time and then said quietly to the darkness, "You know how, sometimes I think it would be easier to just disappear. Go somewhere, nobody knows my name. Who? She named me How. As dog names go, it's fine. As names for a creature that once split a continent in 2, it's a lot." I lifted my head and looked at her. She was watching the night through the window. I got up, walked over, and put my head on her knee. She looked down at me. Then she laughed, quietly, surprised, the first time in 3 days. "Stupid dog," she said, but her voice was soft. Her hand settled on my head. So that's the real Wei Lin, not a villainess. A 17-year-old girl with nowhere to put her honesty and no one to put it with. I've seen actual villains across thousands of years, people who burned cities because they were bored. Wei Lin is nothing like them, not even close. On day 5, a visitor arrived, tall, dark-haired, pleasant face and flawless manners. The servants moved faster when he walked in and started bowing. Crown Prince Lan Chen. I watched from the corner of the sitting room, giving every appearance of studying the pattern in the carpet. He was polite. Too polite. The specific kind of polite that's worse than rudeness. The kind you use when you've already made a decision and you're managing the delivery. "Lady Wei," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, "I need to speak with you about our engagement. Circumstances have changed." Wei Lin sat perfectly straight across from him, face calm, hands still. But I felt it. Her breathing shifted, just barely, just enough to notice. "My father is considering revising the terms of the agreement between our families. The engagement may be—" He didn't finish. "Broken off?" Wei Lin said it for him, steady, no tremor. He left 20 minutes later. She walked him to the door, came back, sat down on the sofa, and went still. She stayed that way for a while. Then she raised her hand and looked at her engagement ring. Thin, small, blue stone, nothing extravagant. I walked over and put my head on her knee again. The strategy worked once. She looked down at me. And for the first time since I'd been here, what I saw in her eyes wasn't exhaustion or loneliness. It was anger. The quiet kind, cold and completely controlled, the kind that doesn't make noise because it doesn't need to. "How?" she said quietly. "The funny thing is, I never wanted this engagement. Not once. But now that he's the one ending it..." She paused. "It's not about him. It's about the way he did it. Yeah, I know. Not losing a fiancé. Being looked at like an obstacle to be cleared rather than a person to be spoken to. There's a difference." The following week, Su Mei appeared. Exactly what I'd pieced together from the servants' descriptions. Gentle face, big brown eyes, simply dressed, but neat. Appropriately modest in every single way. She came with the prince to a gathering the Wei household was hosting. Officially, just an acquaintance of his. Unofficially, everyone understood. I watched. The prince looked at Su Mei the way he should have been looking at his fiancée. Warm, attentive, smiling without deciding to. Su Mei received his attention naturally, not performing shyness, not calculating, just accepting it like something that belonged to her. Wei Lin played perfect hostess, smiled at the right people, said the right things, made sure every glass stayed full, executed flawlessly, and felt nothing about it. Then Su Mei came over to me. "Oh, how adorable," she said, bending down. "Can I pet him?" I allowed it. Politeness matters even to ancient monsters. But the moment her hand touched me, I felt something. A trace. Faint, like the smell of old smoke from a fire that burned out in an empty room. Magic. Not the regular magic of this world. Something else. Dark, woven, layered carefully under a normal aura. Almost invisible. Someone worked very hard to hide this. There was a spell on her. Or she was using something. I couldn't tell precisely. My analytical abilities were still locked down with everything else. But the trace was real. I looked at Su Mei differently after that. Kind brown eyes, gentle smile, every detail exactly right. Too right. When every single thing is perfectly calibrated, that's not warmth. That's construction. I didn't have enough information yet to be certain, but I remembered. That's one thing about living for thousands of years. I remember everything, now. Back to the garden. I'm at the window. The figure in the dark cloak is still there. The artifact is glowing brighter. The spell is being woven toward Wei Lin's sleeping form 10 feet behind me. I could bark, wake the house. The figure would run. The problem would still exist tomorrow night. I needed something else. I reached down, deep, past the locked door where my real power lived, past the compressed ember that used to be an ocean, and found the absolute minimum, less than 1%, the smallest possible fragment. Something changed in the garden. The figure lowered the artifact, slowly turned, looked directly at my window. We looked at each other, through the glass, through the dark, across the distance. I didn't move. I didn't hide. I just looked back. The figure froze. Then, fast, controlled, tucked the artifact away, turned, and disappeared into the darkness so smoothly the bushes didn't even move. What did she feel? A glimpse of what's actually inside this small white body. Less than 1% of the real thing. But apparently 1% of me is enough to make a reasonable person decide immediately that they have somewhere else to be. Good, but not good enough, because she'll be back. Probably not alone next time. I returned to my pillow, sat, thought. Who is she? Connected to Su Mei? Is this timing an accident, appearing right when the prince announced he's ending the engagement? Nothing about this is an accident. Someone is building a trap around Wei Lin, carefully, patiently, with multiple pieces moving at the same time. Su Mei with her hidden dark magic trace, the prince leaving with perfect timing, the figure in the garden with a spell aimed at a sleeping girl, and now a man named Lord Hay, which I hadn't gotten to yet. The day after the garden incident, a messenger arrived from Duke Wei, Wei Lin's father. She read the letter and her face became very calm. Too calm. I recognized that particular stillness by now. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of calm that shows up specifically when something has gone significantly wrong. She picked me up. She did that sometimes, and I had decided I was neutral about it, and said quietly, not to anyone in particular, "Father found me another match, so I won't cause trouble about the prince." She paused. "Lord Hay, have you heard of him?" I had. The servants mentioned him more than once. Nothing useful. Nothing good. A man in his mid-40s, 3 times married. 2 wives died under what the polite version of the story called unclear circumstances. The 3rd disappeared. People said various things. "Father thinks it's a good match. Old family. Wealthy." Her voice was flat. "It doesn't matter that he's 25 years older than me. It doesn't matter what people say about him." Something sharp moved through me. Not fear. Things like me don't fear. Something that wanted to act. Something that does not like this situation at all. So here's the picture. Her father is willing to hand her to a man with an extremely questionable history. The prince is leaving for someone else. Society has already cast her as the villain. And she is completely alone in the middle of all of it. The only creature she tells the truth to is a puppy that used to make mountain ranges change shape when it walked. I looked up at her, and for the first time, completely deliberately, with full awareness, I wagged my tail. She laughed, surprised. "How? You're such a weird dog." "Girl, you have absolutely no idea. Someone is building a trap around her, piece by piece, with patience and precision, and she can't see it because nobody has shown her where to look. But I can see it, and I've spent thousands of years watching things like this unfold, long enough to know exactly where the pieces are going, long enough to know how to move before the trap closes. She thinks she has a pet. What she actually has is the most dangerous thing that has ever lived in this world, sleeping on a pink pillow with ruffles and waiting for the right moment. The moment is getting close, and when it arrives, they are going to be completely unprepared for what's been sleeping on that pink pillow. Who do you think is behind the dark magic? Is Su Mei working alone, or is someone controlling her? Drop your theory in the comments. She came back 3 nights later, not alone this time. I counted 2 figures in the garden before I even got to the window. I'd been expecting this. When you scare someone off with 1% of your real power, you don't make them go away permanently. You just make them go away temporarily and come back with a plan. Which is exactly what happened. I'll give them credit for moving quickly. The 2 figures were positioned differently than last time. One near the east wall, one closer to the house. They'd thought about angles. They'd thought about which window was hers. They'd mapped the garden at some point, which meant this wasn't improvised. Someone planned this carefully. The artifacts were out already, both of them glowing, the same dark signature I'd felt before, but stronger now. 2 sources amplifying each other. Whatever this spell was meant to do, it required this much power to work. That told me something. This wasn't a simple hex or a sleeping curse. This was something that needed precision and force at the same time. Something that had to get through whatever natural resistance Wei Lin carried. Here's the thing about dark woven magic. It leaves a stain, not on the person it targets, on the caster. Every time you use it, It marks you. And I could feel both of them from across the garden, even with my power buried as deep as it was. Not their faces, not their identities, but their marks. One of them I'd felt before. The same signature as the first night. The same signature as the faint trace on Sumei's hand when she'd petted me at the gathering. Same source, all three connected. I filed that away. The second signature was different. Older. Much more experienced. Someone who had been using this kind of magic for years and knew exactly what they were doing. This was not a student. This was not someone experimenting. This was a professional, which changed the situation considerably. I went back to the ember buried inside me. 2% this time. I knew the cost. It would set my recovery back by days, maybe more. The body would need extra time to compensate, but 1% had scared off one person. 2% aimed at two people simultaneously was going to make a point that I didn't think they'd recover from quickly. I pressed my nose against the glass and looked at the figure closer to the house, the experienced one, directly, steadily. And I let just enough of the real thing through to be completely unmistakable. Less than 2%. More than enough. The reaction was immediate. The experienced figure stumbled backward like they'd walked into a wall. The artifact dropped into the grass. Their hands came up, a defensive gesture, completely automatic, the kind your body does when your brain hasn't caught up yet. The first figure turned toward them, confused. Then they looked at the window. Then they did something that actually surprised me. They ran, not walked quickly, not retreated carefully. Ran, full speed, through the garden, over the wall, gone in seconds. The experienced figure was still standing there, breathing hard. I could tell even from this distance. They'd felt more of what I was than the first person had, and they had enough knowledge to understand what that meant. They didn't run, they walked away. Controlled, but they left the artifact behind in the grass. That was more interesting than the running. A professional leaving their tool behind means they decided very quickly that retrieving it wasn't worth the risk of staying near this window for another second. I looked at the artifact lying in the wet grass, still faintly glowing, and thought, that belongs to me now. Evidence doesn't collect itself. The next morning, Wei Lin woke up, called for breakfast, and had no idea that someone had been in her garden twice, trying to do something to her while she slept. I watched her eat. She was reading something, a letter, from the looks of it, which made her expression close up the way it did when correspondence came from her father. She put the letter down without finishing it, drank her tea slowly, looked out the window at nothing in particular for a long moment. I needed to get to that artifact before the gardeners found it and threw it away, or before whoever left it sent someone to retrieve it. Neither of those outcomes worked for me. The problem was obvious. I was a 6-week-old puppy. The garden door was heavy. The latch was a handle style that required an opposable thumb. I had 4 options. I was approximately the size of a large melon. I sat by the garden door and made a sound, not a bark, more of a pointed, sustained comment directed at the closed door. Wei Lin looked up from her tea, looked at me, looked at the door. "You want to go outside?" She seemed surprised. I'd never asked before. She got up and opened the door. I walked out into the garden with as much dignity as a very small dog can manage, which is admittedly not much. The artifact was near the east wall, half hidden in the grass. It looked like a flat, dark stone with markings carved into it. From the outside, harmless. A rock. Nobody would look twice. I sat next to it, sniffed it for Wei Lin's benefit, pawed at it a little. She watched from the doorway. "What did you find?" I picked the stone up carefully in my mouth, which was an undignified thing to do but entirely necessary, and carried it back to her. The moment it was in my teeth, I felt the magic on it clearly. A whole conversation in dark signatures, compressed into one object. Whoever made this spent significant time on it. This was not cheap work. This was not a small favor between acquaintances. Someone paid for this. Someone with resources and patience and a very specific goal related to Wei Lin. She took it from me, turned it over. A stone? Where did this come from? She looked around the garden, puzzled. One of the servants must have dropped it. She almost set it on the garden wall. I made another sound, She looked at me. I looked at the stone. She looked at the stone. Back at me. "You want it?" She handed it back. I took it and carried it to my pillow inside and placed it underneath, where I could keep track of it. Wei Lin watched this entire sequence and then said, slowly, "Oh, are you collecting things?" "Girl, I'm building evidence. There's a difference, but I appreciated that she let me keep it." Over the next few days, events began accelerating in a way that told me someone was getting impatient with the pace of their own plan. The formal letter arrived. Duke Wei Lin's father, had confirmed the arrangement with Lord Hei's family. The engagement would be announced at the autumn court gathering, 6 weeks away. 6 weeks. Wei Lin read the letter at breakfast. She set it down, finished her tea, asked for more. Her face showed nothing. Her hands were completely still on the table. That was the tell. When Wei Lin was actually calm, her hands moved, adjusting things, turning objects. When she went still, she was working very hard to appear calm. I was on the chair beside her, watching her hands on the table, thinking about 6 weeks and what could be done inside that window. 6 weeks was not a lot of time, but it was also not nothing. A lot could happen in 6 weeks, including me figuring out exactly who was behind the garden visits and what they actually wanted. Because here's what I knew so far. The dark magic on the artifact was connected to Su Mei. Su Mei was connected to Prince Lan Chen. The prince was ending his engagement to Wei Lin at the exact same time someone was sending people to cast spells on her while she slept. And now, immediately after the engagement ends, her father has arranged a marriage to a man whose previous wives had a statistically concerning habit of dying. Either this was the most extraordinary concentration of bad luck in one person's life, or every piece of it was deliberately coordinated. I don't believe in coincidence. I've lived long enough to know that what looks like coincidence is almost always a plan that hasn't been fully revealed yet. Someone wanted Wei Lin isolated, removed from the prince's orbit, pushed into a situation she couldn't get out of. And they were moving multiple pieces at the same time to make sure it happened. The question was who and why. Wei Lin was powerful. Her family name, her father's position, her own intelligence. Someone wanted that power removed from the board or redirected or controlled. But which one? 3 days after the formal letter arrived, something happened that gave me a genuinely new piece of the picture I was building. Wei Lin had a visitor, a young woman about her age named Rui Yue, the daughter of a court minister, one of the few people who seemed to actually like Wei Lin rather than just fear her. They met in the sitting room. I stayed near the door and pretended to sleep. My favorite strategy, extremely effective. Rui Yue was nervous. She kept looking at her hands. She'd come with something she wanted to say and was deciding whether to actually say it. "I heard something," she finally said. Low voice, quick glance at the door. "About Lord Hei." Wei Lin said nothing, waited. My father had a meeting last week with Lord Hei's family steward. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but our study shares a wall with the meeting room, and the wall is not as thick as everyone seems to think. "What did you hear?" Wei Lin's voice was perfectly level, the way it always was when she was paying very close attention to every word. Rui Yue took a breath. "Lord Hei's household has been corresponding with someone at court for months, someone with access to your father. They've been working on this arrangement for a long time, much longer than you've known about it." The room went quiet. Wei Lin looked at her. "How long exactly?" Her voice didn't change at all. "My father mentioned a date, about 8 months ago, which is..." Rui Yue paused. "Which was right around the time the rumors about you and Prince Lan Chen started getting worse. The one saying you were trying to manipulate him, holding the engagement against his will." I opened my eyes, not to look at anything in particular, just because what I was hearing required my full attention. 8 months ago. The rumors started 8 months ago. The arrangement with Lord Hei started being planned 8 months ago, not a response to the engagement ending. A preparation for it, built and running months before the engagement publicly showed any cracks. Someone started working on removing Wei Lin from the prince's orbit 8 months ago. They planted rumors to damage her reputation. They arranged an alternate match to catch her when she fell, and they used the prince, or someone close to him, as the instrument to make the engagement end. This was not a trap built around Wei Lin. This was a trap built around the prince that used Wei Lin as the weight. Someone wanted Prince Lan Chen to move towards Su Mei, which meant that whoever was behind this had an interest in Su Mei's position, or in the prince's position, or both. Rui Yue was still talking. I don't know who the contact at your father's court is. My father didn't say a name, but whoever it is has been very patient and very careful. Thank you, Wei Lin said, still perfectly neutral. You didn't have to tell me this. I know. Rui Yue stood up to leave, hesitated. Be careful. Whoever is doing this, they're not going to stop. After she left, Wei Lin sat quietly for a moment. Then she looked directly at me. I was supposed to be asleep. I had not been remotely asleep. How much of that did you actually understand? She asked slowly. I looked up at her with my most neutral expression, which is admittedly just a dog face. Right, she said. You're a dog. She leaned back in her chair. I'm talking to my dog about a political conspiracy. This is where my life is right now. She rubbed her temple. 8 months. They've been planning this for 8 months, and I didn't notice a single piece of it moving. I wanted very badly to be able to speak. The inability to communicate anything beyond basic dog behavior was the single most frustrating aspect of my current situation. I could tell her, I know about the artifact. I know about the garden. I know about the dark magic on Su Mei. I know this is bigger than she thinks, and that whoever is behind it has professional resources. Instead, I walked over, sat down next to her chair, and leaned against her leg. The full extent of my communicative options. She put her hand on my head. What would I do without you who, I thought, probably walks straight into a very well-constructed political trap without knowing it was there, but I kept that to myself. That night, I did something I hadn't done since arriving in this body. I pushed harder on the locked door where my power lived, not to use anything, just to assess what I was actually working with. A survey of the damage, so to speak, an inventory of resources. The ember was still there, still buried, but it was slightly larger than it had been 3 weeks ago. The body was adapting, slowly but genuinely. The capacity was growing. At this rate, I'd have maybe 5% available within another month. Enough to do something real. Not enough to do everything I needed to do, but enough to start. I also did something else. I focused on the artifact under my pillow and very carefully, using almost no power at all, traced the dark signature back to its origin point. Not all the way. I couldn't follow it that far with what I had, but far enough to confirm the origin was inside the palace complex. Not a street-level hired hand, not an outsider with a grudge. Someone inside the palace, someone with access to resources, to information, to the prince's inner circle. Someone who knew Wei Lin's schedule well enough to know when the garden would be empty and when she'd be asleep. The list of people who could move that freely inside the palace was not long. It was, in fact, very short. I put that information next to everything else I'd collected and let the picture develop. The next morning, when Wei Lin came down to breakfast, I could tell immediately that something had changed overnight. Something internal. Wei Lin came down to breakfast looking different. Not visibly. Her posture was the same. Her expression was the same. But different in the way that a person is different when they've made a decision in the night and woken up knowing exactly what they intend to do. I recognized it. I've worn that look myself a few thousand times. She ate quickly. Called for her head attendant. Gave 3 sets of instructions in rapid succession. First, she wanted a full inventory of her personal finances. What was hers outright? What was connected to her father's holdings? What would remain hers if the family relationship changed? Second, she wanted a quiet meeting arranged with the family's legal steward. Private. No record in the household log. Third, she wanted to know the current location and schedule of every person on a list she wrote out in a very neat hand and passed over without explanation. The attendant took the list, looked at it, and for 1 second her composure slipped. Then she nodded and left. I managed to read 2 of the names on that list before she folded it and handed it over. 2 names were enough to understand the direction. Rui Yue's father and Lord He. Wei Lin was not going to sit still and let this happen to her. She'd spent one night with the information Rui Yue brought her and come out the other side with a plan. I felt something that I don't experience often. Something that I want to be clear I am experiencing in a completely analytical and detached way. Respect. Genuine, completely unsentimental, earned from scratch respect for a 17-year-old girl who refused to stay still while being buried. She was 17 years old, her engagement had just been broken off, her father was selling her to a man with dead wives, someone was sending people to her garden at night, and she had spent 8 months being the target of a campaign she didn't even know existed, and her response was to wake up, eat her breakfast, and start moving pieces. I decided in that moment that whatever she was planning, I was going to make sure it worked. Not because I was attached, not because she scratched behind my ear in a way that this body found embarrassing levels of pleasant, purely because I had decided so. That was the only reason. Completely rational. Later that same afternoon, Wei Lin left the house for the first time in nearly a week. She brought me, which I had started to accept as standard. She went to the city's scholar district, the part of the capital where old families kept private libraries and researchers for hire operated out of quiet rooms. The kind of place where people went specifically to find information that wasn't supposed to be findable through any normal official channel. She brought me. I sat in her lap in the carriage and thought about the palace signature on the artifact and what I could do with 5% of my power in approximately 4 weeks. The scholar district was quieter than the main city. Old stone buildings, people who walked quickly and didn't make eye contact, which in my experience meant they were all carrying information they'd been paid to find and didn't want to accidentally share it. Wei Lin walked to a building at the end of a very narrow street, knocked twice, paused, then once more. The door opened without question. The man inside was older, 60s maybe, with the look of someone who had spent decades reading things he wasn't supposed to read, sharp eyes behind thick glasses. He looked at Wei Lin. "Lady Wei." The old man said it without any surprise at all. He had clearly been expecting this visit and had prepared for it accordingly. "Master Chen." She sat down across from him without being invited to, which I appreciated as a style choice. "I need information on Lord He. Everything that isn't in the official family records." He folded his hands carefully on the table between them. "That's a very broad request." Wei Lin looked at him steadily. "I have broad concerns." He looked at me. I was sitting in Wei Lin's lap, looking as harmless as possible, which at 6 weeks old is admittedly very harmless. "The dog comes to research meetings now," he said. "He goes where I go," Wei Lin said, in a tone that ended the topic. Master Chen looked at her for a moment, then unfolded his hands and began talking in the careful tone of someone choosing every word deliberately. What he told her in the next hour was not pleasant. 2 of Lord He's dead wives had family members who'd tried to raise formal complaints at the time. Both cases had been closed quickly. Too quickly. The speed of the closure suggested influence. Someone had pressed on the investigation and made it stop before it found anything. Someone with enough standing to make government officials move in a specific direction without needing to explain their reasons to anyone. Lord He didn't have that kind of standing on his own. He was old money, yes. Connected, yes. But not powerful enough to shut down 2 separate investigations by himself, which meant someone was helping him, or someone had helped him in the past, building a debt that was now being called in. Wei Lin asked the question I would have asked. "Does the name of the official who closed the second investigation appear in any other cases?" Master Chen smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that belongs to someone who has been sitting with exactly this question for a long time. "It does," he said. 3 times. Same official. Different families. Same outcome. Complaint raised. Investigation opened. Investigation closed within 2 weeks. No findings. "Who is the official?" He wrote a name on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Wei Lin looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she folded it and put it in her sleeve. Her expression didn't change, but her breathing did, just slightly. I felt it from her lap. The name on that paper was someone she recognized, someone close enough to matter. We went back to the carriage. Wei Lin sat very still for the ride home, not speaking a single word the entire way. I sat in her lap, thinking about palace signatures, 8-month plans, and someone who needed Wei Lin gone badly enough to build all of this. The trap was significantly bigger than I had initially assessed. More layers to it, more patience behind it, more pieces all moving together. And right in the center of it was a 17-year-old girl who had just spent the afternoon learning how deep the hole under her feet actually went. I looked up at her. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were forward. She wasn't scared. That was the thing. She'd just had a very bad hour's worth of information delivered to her, and she was not scared. She was thinking. Good, because what was coming was going to require that. A lot of it. And, purely for strategic reasons, it was going to require me. Just as soon as this body was ready. 4 weeks, maybe less. The ember was growing. I could feel it every night now. A little more warmth than the night before. Whatever was coming for Wei Lin, it was going to find something on this pink, ruffled pillow that it was absolutely not prepared for. I wagged my tail again. The body did it completely on its own without consulting me. I have officially decided to stop being embarrassed about this. What do you think Wei Lin is going to do with that name she put in her sleeve? Comment below. I want to see your predictions. The name Wei Lin put in her sleeve was Lord Chancellor Wen Bao, the second most powerful man in the empire after the emperor himself. I figured this out 3 days later when I heard her say it out loud, quietly, to herself, in an empty room, the way people say names they're still deciding what to do with. Wen Bao, head of the Imperial Court Council. The man who had built his position over 40 years of patient, careful, absolutely ruthless political maneuvering. The man who had, apparently, been closing investigations into Lord Hei's dead wives for somewhere between 10 and 15 years. I sat on my pillow and thought about that for a while, because this changed the shape of everything considerably. This wasn't about Wei Lin specifically. It never had been. She was a piece on a board that someone had been playing for decades before she was old enough to be relevant. Lord Chancellor Wen Bao needed the Crown Prince to make a specific choice. He needed Prince Lanchen aligned with Su Mei, or more precisely, aligned with whoever was behind Su Mei. Wei Lin, engaged to the prince since childhood, was the obstacle to that alignment, so she had to be moved, cleanly, without obvious force. Damage her reputation. Introduce a rival. Let the prince's natural feelings do the work. Then catch Wei Lin on the way down with a prearranged marriage to a controllable man. Elegant, patient. The kind of plan that takes years to execute and leaves absolutely no fingerprints on anything or anyone connected to it. I've watched a lot of political strategies across a lot of centuries. This one was genuinely good. I could appreciate the craftsmanship even while I was planning to dismantle it entirely. But here was the core problem with Wei Lin's situation. The part she hadn't fully mapped yet, and the part that mattered most right now. She had a name. Having a name and being able to use it were two completely different things. Lord Chancellor Wen Bao was the second most powerful man in the empire. Her father was powerful, but not that powerful. Going at Wen Bao directly would end Wei Lin before she finished her first sentence. He'd been playing this game since before her parents were born. She needed leverage. Or she needed to be somewhere he couldn't reach, or she needed him looking at a different problem while she moved somewhere else entirely. 3 options, all of them complicated, and 5 weeks left before the autumn court gathering where the engagement to Lord Hei would be formally announced. I watched Wei Lin move through the next week and thought, she's smart, she's genuinely smart, but she doesn't have all the information yet. She didn't know about the garden visits, she didn't know about the artifact, she didn't know about the dark magic connection between Su Mei and whoever was running this operation. She was working with half a picture. A genuinely good half, smart, well-sourced, carefully assembled, but still only half of the real thing. The problem, as I have established, was that I couldn't tell her anything. 6 weeks into this body, and my linguistic capabilities remained exclusively limited to sounds a puppy makes. Deeply frustrating for a creature that once negotiated terms with divine beings. I needed a different approach. If I couldn't speak, I needed to arrange information in front of her in a way she could read herself. The artifact was the key. It was still under my pillow. I'd been keeping it there deliberately for exactly this reason. If Wei Lin could get it to someone who understood dark woven magic, they could trace it back through the signature chain. Not all the way to Wen Bao, but far enough to confirm the palace connection, far enough to give her one more piece. The question was how to get it to the right person without being able to explain why. I spent 2 days thinking about this. Then I did something extremely undignified. I carried the artifact in my mouth to the center of Wei Lin's study, placed it on the floor directly in front of her while she was working, and sat down next to it. She looked at the stone on the floor, then at me. "You've been keeping this under your pillow." I looked at the artifact with great concentration. "You found this in the garden. You found this in the garden." She picked it up slowly. "The morning after I started noticing you watching the windows at night." She turned it over, studied the markings. "This isn't decorative. These are working symbols." She looked at me again with those violet eyes that seemed to always be one question ahead of where I expected. Where exactly in the garden did you find this?" I walked to the window that faced east and sat down in front of it. She was quiet for a moment. "East wall. 2 nights ago I thought I heard something outside, but by the time I looked there was nothing there." She held the artifact up to the light. "Someone was in my garden, and you found what they left behind." Another pause. "How are you this useful? You're 8 weeks old. 8 weeks. The body was growing. I could feel it. Not just the slow expansion of capacity, but actual physical development. I was noticeably larger than I'd been when Wei Lin bought me. Still small, still limited, but the ember inside was definitely warming." Wei Lin took the artifact to Master Chen the next morning. I came along, obviously. She had completely stopped questioning this at some point in the past 2 weeks, and I considered that progress. Master Chen took one look at the stone, put it down on his table, and then looked at Wei Lin with an expression that had moved past professional into something more personal. "Where did you get this?" "My dog found it in my garden." He looked at me. I looked back. He looked at the stone again. "When?" 3 weeks ago. I've been waiting to bring it in until I understood more of the larger picture." She paused. "I understand more now." Master Chen pulled on a pair of thin gloves and picked the artifact back up carefully, like something that might object to being handled. He carried it to a smaller table against the far wall and held it under a concentrated light, cleaner and sharper than the regular lanterns. The markings became significantly more visible under that concentrated light, layers of symbols overlapping each other with precise intent. More complex than anything I'd managed to read from across a dark garden at midnight. The body had been 6 weeks old then. A lot had changed since 6 weeks. "This is layered work," he said. "Whoever made this spent significant time on it. This isn't hired street magic." "Can you trace the origin?" Wei Lin asked, leaning slightly forward. Her voice was controlled, but the question came out faster than usual. "Partially." He set it back down carefully. "The outer layers I can read. The signature chain goes through at least 3 intermediary hands before reaching the original source. Whoever commissioned this knew exactly how to create distance between themselves and the finished product." He looked at Wei Lin directly. "The outer layer signature matches work I've seen before, twice, both times connected to cases involving the Imperial Court Council." Wei Lin didn't move from her chair. "The Council," she said slowly, "but you can't connect it to a specific member directly." "I can't make that connection directly, but the style of layering, the specific technique used to hide the commission trail, I've only ever seen it used by one school of practitioners, and that school operates exclusively under council patronage." Wei Lin stood up. "I need a copy of those 2 previous cases. I'll have them ready by tomorrow." He hesitated. "Lady Wei, this is significant. If someone sent this to your garden, they intended to cast something against you directly. This level of working, it requires line of sight to the target. Someone stood in your garden and aimed this at where you slept." "I know," she said. "You don't seem alarmed." "I am alarmed. I've just had enough practice keeping it off my face." She picked me up. I'd accepted this. It was practical. And looked at Master Chen. Tomorrow, on the way back to the carriage, Wei Lin held me a little tighter than usual. Not much. Just enough that I noticed. The picture was forming for her now. Someone in the council had commissioned a magic working aimed directly at her. It connected to the same network as the rumors that had damaged her reputation, the same network that had planted Sume, the same network that had arranged her father's match with Lord Hay. This wasn't political maneuvering anymore. This was personal. Someone had stood in her garden at night with a tool designed to do something to her directly. I felt that tighter grip on my fur and thought, yes, now you understand the actual scope of it. Good. Because understanding the scope was the first step, and we were running out of time. 4 weeks until the autumn court gathering. 3 days later, the situation changed completely when something happened that none of us were expecting. Prince Lan Chen came to the Wei household again. No letter, no appointment, unannounced, late afternoon, which itself said something. The expression on his face when Wei Lin's attendant showed him in was entirely different from the last time he'd sat in this room. Not managed, not polite. Something underneath it that looked, and I was using the word carefully, applying thousands of years of reading people, something that looked like guilt. Wei Lin received him in the main sitting room. I was on the chair in the corner, my usual post. Lady Wei. He sat down across from her, didn't wait for pleasantries. I need to tell you something. Wei Lin waited. Sume came to me 2 nights ago. She told me something about herself that He stopped, started again. She told me that the feelings between us were not entirely natural. The room went quiet, both of them thinking about what that actually meant for Wei Lin's situation and how exposed she now was. She said that she had been using something, a compound, added to my tea over several months, something that affected my perceptions and my emotional responses. He looked at his hands. She said someone told her to do it, that she hadn't wanted to, that she had been frightened badly enough that she felt she had no choice. I processed this carefully. Sume had confessed, which meant one of 2 things. Either she had genuinely broken under guilt, or she had been told to confess by the people running her. The second option was more interesting, because a confession from Sume would redirect the prince's focus potentially toward a specific explanation that still left the larger network untouched. Wei Lin was thinking the same thing. I could see it in the slight change around her eyes. She told you herself, she said, willingly. She was crying. She seemed... Did she tell you who instructed her? He hesitated. A servant in her household. Someone who had been placed with her family several years ago. A servant, Wei Lin said. Not a name above a servant. The prince looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. An awareness arriving slowly, the kind that feels like cold water. You already knew something was happening, he said. I knew something was coordinated. I didn't know the method. She looked at him steadily. How many months? 7, maybe 8. 8 months, starting exactly when everything else started, the timing locked. The servant, was she arrested? She disappeared the night before Sume came to me. He paused. Sume seems to believe this was coincidence. Wei Lin said nothing to that. She was looking at him with that expression she used when she was filing information into a category she'd already opened. I thought, not coincidence. The servant was removed before she could be questioned properly. Whoever was running this cleaned a piece off the board the moment they decided the compound story was going to come out. They let Sume confess. They removed the servant who connected Sume to the actual network. They preserved the layer between the confession and the real origin. Still, Wenbao's style all the way through. Extraordinarily patient, always one step ahead of where anyone else was looking at any given moment. But they'd made a mistake. Because they couldn't have known about Master Chen. They couldn't have known about the artifact. They were pulling one thread, while Wei Lin was already holding several others. The prince kept talking, filling the silence. I owe you more than one apology. What happened to our engagement, what I let happen, was not your fault entirely, Wei Lin said, and she meant it. I could hear that she meant it, which was interesting. You were used, so was I, by the same people. She looked at him with those clear violet eyes that always seemed to be one step ahead of the conversation. The question is what we do with it now." The prince looked at her, really looked at her, possibly for the first time without the compound affecting his perception, and something complicated moved across his face. He stayed for another hour. They talked, not about the engagement, about what Wei Lin had found, about the council, about the cases Master Chen had identified. She told him measured pieces, enough to bring him in as an asset. Not everything, because she was too careful for that. The prince's position made him useful, but also made him a vulnerability. Anyone watching him would be watching who he talked to. When he left, Wei Lin sat quietly for a moment. Then she looked at me. "You're not going to believe what I'm thinking about doing," she said. I waited on my chair in the corner, watching both of them, looking as uninvested in the outcome as a small dog reasonably could. "I think I need to be publicly unmanageable enough that the autumn court engagement can't proceed cleanly." She considered this. Not scandalous. I can't give them ammunition, but visible, present, loud enough and present enough that rushing through a formal court announcement becomes genuinely complicated for the people pushing it. I thought about this. It was actually not bad. Wen Bao's plan depended on Wei Lin quietly disappearing into Lord Hei's household. Making her visible, present, and actively involved in court life created friction in that plan. You can't quietly disappear someone who keeps showing up. I also, she continued, need to find out who in my father's inner circle is reporting to Wen Bao. Someone is feeding information about our household to the council. Someone who knew my schedule well enough to know when to send people to the garden. She was getting there. I'd been thinking about that specific piece since the second garden visit. And, she said, with the tone of someone who had arrived at the hardest item on a list, "I need to talk to my father." She looked at the window. "He's not behind this. He's being used, the same way Lan Chen was being used. He doesn't know it." I thought, "You're probably right about that." Duke Wei was powerful, but not subtle. He would have been easy to manage for someone with Wen Bao's experience. A few carefully placed suggestions, a few manufactured pressures, and the Duke would make every decision they needed him to make while believing they were his own. Wei Lin stood up. "Tomorrow I'm going to my father's estate. I'm going to tell him about the artifact and what Master Chen found." She picked me up. I had completely stopped having opinions about this. Not everything, but enough that he understands someone has been working around him inside his own household. I looked up at her. The plan was reasonable. The timeline was tight. And there was still the question of the dark magic trace on Su Mei, which nobody had addressed yet. Su Mei herself might be in a dangerous position now that she'd served her purpose. A cleaned piece, like the servant who disappeared. Also, there was still the issue of my power level. The ember was maybe 3% now. Enough to do something specific and controlled. Not enough for anything large-scale. 3% of what I actually was remained considerably more than most things in this world were capable of. But I needed to use it carefully, and at exactly the right moment. I was calculating windows, options. The autumn court gathering in 4 weeks was the pressure point. Everything was timed around that event. If I could hold the situation stable for 2 more weeks, the ember would be at approximately 5 to 6%. That was enough to do something genuinely disruptive to Wen Bao's network without exposing myself. The plan forming in my mind was not what Wei Lin was planning. It was parallel to it, running underneath. She would move the visible pieces. I would handle the parts she couldn't see. 2 tracks, neither aware of the other, converging on the same point. It was, I thought, an extremely elegant arrangement, almost as elegant as Wen Bao's original plan, but with considerably better outcomes for the people I had decided mattered in this situation. Then the next morning arrived, and things nearly went wrong. Wei Lin had been awake early. I could tell from the state of her room when I woke up, the lamp still lit, papers moved around. She'd been planning through the night. She was getting ready to leave for her father's estate, when her head attendant came in with the expression of someone delivering news they would rather not deliver. Lord Hei had arrived at the Wei household without any announcement or prior contact of any kind. Just appeared at the gate with 6 attendants, and he had brought a gift. Wei Lin went still in the way that meant something significant was happening behind her eyes. "How many people does he have with him?" 6 attendants, and—" The woman hesitated. "And Lord Chancellor Wenbao's personal secretary, as a witness to the gift presentation," he said. There it was. Wenbao was making a move ahead of schedule. Sending his secretary to witness a gift presentation was a way of saying, "This arrangement is under my protection. Try to refuse it, and you're refusing me." Wei Lin looked at the window for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at me. "Ho, stay in this room." She left. I heard her footsteps down the hall toward the formal reception room. I stayed in the room for approximately 4 seconds before concluding that I had never once in my existence stayed where I was told. I followed her. I am not a creature that stays where it's told. I'm a creature that assesses situations and makes its own operational decisions. These are different things. I moved quietly down the hallway and positioned myself just outside the reception room door, which had been left slightly open. From this angle, I could see everything without being seen. Lord Hay was exactly as the servants had described. Mid-40s, well-dressed, pleasant face, the carefully maintained kind that takes work to keep neutral. He stood in the center of the room with the ease of someone who had walked into rooms expecting things to go his way for a very long time. The gift was a jade piece. Significant. Expensive. The kind of thing you give to formalize a relationship that has already been decided. Wenbao's secretary, a thin man in council robes, stood near the wall with a document and a small, satisfied smile. Wei Lin accepted the jade piece with both hands. Correct form. Not a single thing about her expression showed anything at all. "Lord Hay," Wei Lin said, her voice perfectly even, "and Lord Chancellor Wenbao's personal secretary. I wasn't expecting either of you today." "Lord Hay wished to make his intentions clear before the formal announcement," the secretary said smoothly. "The Lord Chancellor sends his personal regards to the Wei household and his hopes for a happy union." Translation: This engagement has the Chancellor's backing, and any attempt to refuse it is a decision made against the second most powerful man in the Empire. Wei Lin looked at the jade piece in her hands. Then she looked at Lord Hay directly for the first time. "I'm honored by the gift," she said, "and by the Lord Chancellor's kind attention to my family's affairs." She set the jade piece on the table beside her with precise, controlled care. "I look forward to speaking with my father before the formal announcement. I'm sure he would want to confirm the arrangements personally." The secretary's smile stayed exactly the same. "Of course, we expect the Duke at court within the week." They stayed another 20 minutes. Wei Lin was flawless, gracious, appropriately warm, gave away absolutely nothing. When they left, she stood in the reception room and looked at the jade piece on the table for a long moment. Then she looked down and noticed me sitting next to the door. "I told you to stay in the room." I looked at the jade piece, then at her, then at the door they'd just walked out of. She looked at the ceiling for one brief second. "You were in the hallway listening to the entire thing," she said. Not a question at all. She picked me up and stood there, looking at the jade piece on the table and thinking, the specific kind of thinking I'd learned to recognize, the kind where she made herself look at the full picture. All of it, including the parts that were harder to hold than the rest. "He sent his secretary," she said quietly. "That was a message. He's moving up the timeline." She was quiet for a moment. "We have less time than I thought." Yes, that was exactly right. When Bao was nervous, he'd sent the secretary as a show of force, which meant something had made him uncertain enough to accelerate. The prince's visit. The visit had been noticed. Someone in this household was watching, and Wenbao now knew that Wei Lin and the prince had spoken privately. He was tightening the timeline in response, which meant he was watching the Wei household closely, which meant going to Master Chen again was complicated, and going to her father was now urgent instead of merely important. I looked up at Wei Lin's face from her arms. The jaw was set. The eyes were fixed forward on something only she could see right now. But underneath the composure, for the first time, I could feel something from her that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Closer to the recognition that the gap between what she knew and what she could do about it was real, and that it mattered, and that time was running out. 3.5 weeks. Wenbao accelerating. The information network around her tightening. She needed more than a plan. She needed something that Wen Bao wasn't accounting for. The ember inside me had grown to almost 4% overnight. I could feel it more clearly every morning now, a steady warmth where there used to be just the faintest trace of heat. 2 more weeks, maybe less. She just needed to stay in front of this for 2 more weeks, and I was going to make sure she did. I pressed my nose against her chin, which was a new development I had not previously allowed this body to do. She startled slightly, then laughed. That quiet, surprised laugh she had, and her grip shifted from tight to something easier. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, we figure it out." We. She'd started saying we without noticing it. I noticed. That night, someone tried to break into the Wei household for the first time. Not the garden, the house itself. I was awake. I'd been sleeping less as the power grew, the body needing less rest as it adapted, when I heard the sound. A specific sound, the kind that doesn't belong at 3 in the morning in a locked house. 2nd floor, east corridor. The servants' access stairway that ran all the way down to the back gate of the property. Someone had gotten past the gate, meaning either the lock had been handled or someone inside had helped. The household informant Wei Lin was looking for had just made their first operational move. I went to Wei Lin's door, scratched at it once, then twice. The pattern I'd been training her on for the past week, she didn't know I was training her on it, but she'd noticed that 2 scratches meant something she should pay attention to. She was awake in seconds, which told me she'd been sleeping lightly, already on alert. The door opened. She looked at me. I looked at the east corridor. Back at her, she understood immediately. She moved fast and quietly, got the small blade she kept in the bedside drawer, which I had noted with approval, and went to the window that overlooked the east corridor roof access. Whatever she saw there made her expression do something I hadn't seen it do before. Something sharp and cold and completely decided. She didn't call for help. Instead, she went back to her writing desk, wrote something quickly on 2 separate pieces of paper, and sealed them both. Then she came back to me. "I know who it is," she said very quietly. "I've suspected for 2 weeks. I just needed confirmation." She held up the 2 sealed letters. "One of these goes to Master Chen in the morning. The other, I need you to do something for me." She looked at me seriously, the way she'd been looking at me more and more lately, like the question in her eyes when she first bought me was getting closer to an answer she wasn't quite ready to name yet. "I know this sounds insane," she said, "but I think you understand more than you should. I think you have since the beginning." I looked up at her from the floor with the expression that this body defaulted to, which was, unfortunately, just a dog looking at someone. "The prince left his contact address with me, his private one, not the official channel." She held out the 2nd letter. "If I take this through the household, whoever just accessed the east corridor may intercept it, but if you—" She stopped, reconsidered. "This is insane." I stood up, walked to her, and took the sealed letter gently from her hand. She stared at me. I walked to the window and looked back at her. Long silence. "You are the strangest dog," she said. "You are without question the strangest dog that has ever existed." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened the window. "Girl, you have absolutely no idea what you just handed a letter to. But you're getting warmer. What do you think happens when Kay finally gets enough power to act directly? Comment your prediction. I want to know what you're expecting. I delivered the letter. This requires some explanation, because delivering a letter as a small white puppy with no opposable thumbs is not simple. This requires some explanation, because delivering a letter when you are a small white dog with no opposable thumbs and a body that is still technically a puppy is not a straightforward operation. But I have navigated worse logistics in worse bodies. I've crossed dimensions. I've sealed rifts between worlds. I can find one prince's private residence. I left through the window Wei Lin opened, moved through 3 streets and 2 market alleys, located the address by scent. The prince had been in the Wei household enough times that I had his signature. I scratched at a side door until a very confused night servant opened it, looked at me, looked at the seal on the letter, and said nothing useful. The servant stared at me. I dropped the sealed letter at his feet. He picked it up, looked at the seal, looked at me, looked back at the seal. I turned around and went home. By the time I was back on my pillow, Wei Lin was asleep. She'd left the window unlatched. Whether that was deliberate or she'd forgotten, I chose to interpret it as deliberate. The next morning, she woke up and looked at me for a long moment before she said anything. "Did you actually go?" I looked at her. "You went," she said. "You actually went and came back." She sat up slowly. "I need to stop being surprised when you do things like that. I need to just accept that this is what you are." She was quiet for a moment, doing something with that information, filing it, letting it reshape the framework. "How?" she said finally. "Whatever you are, I'm glad you're here." I looked at her from my pillow, thought, the feeling is increasingly mutual, kept that to myself. 3 days later, 2 things happened at the same time. The first, Duke Wei arrived at the household, not with a letter, in person, which meant Wei Lin's message had landed the way she'd intended it to. The second, I woke up in the morning, reached down into the ember, and felt 5% available. Right on schedule, maybe slightly ahead. 5% of what I actually was. For context, 5% of me was approximately equivalent to every active combat mage in the Kai Empire combined, give or take. Not enough to end this cleanly on my own, but enough to do something very specific and very precise at exactly the right moment. I needed to wait for the right moment. It wasn't here yet, but it was close enough that I could feel the shape of it from where I was standing. Duke Wei was a large man with a face that was used to being listened to. He sat down across from Wei Lin in the formal sitting room. He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. More things than he usually let show. He was angry. He was worried. He was, underneath both of those, something that Wei Lin hadn't mentioned in any of her evening conversations with me. He was a father who was looking at his daughter and seeing that something was very wrong and realizing he'd been too far away from that fact for too long. Wei Lin had told him, through the message, just enough. The artifact, Master Chen's findings, the connection to the council. Not Wen Bao's name, not yet. Just enough to establish that someone had been working around him inside his own household and that his daughter had been the target. Duke Wei sat forward. "Show me everything," he said. His voice had changed, no longer the formal register, something more direct underneath it. She showed him everything. The artifact, Master Chen's copied report connecting the cases to council-linked practitioners. The timeline, 8 months of coordinated activity that had moved around the Duke's own decisions without him seeing a single hand involved. He sat very still through all of it. The face didn't move much, but I was watching his hands. They tightened on his knee about halfway through, stayed tight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Who?" One word, not a question, a requirement. Wei Lin looked at him steadily. "If I tell you the name, I need you to promise me something first." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. This was new from her, and he was adjusting to it. "I need you to not move immediately, not confront, not withdraw, not do anything that signals you know, because whoever this is has been watching this household. Any sudden change in your behavior tells them the information has moved." Duke Wei studied his daughter for what felt like a full minute. "You've been running this yourself," he said. Not accusatory, more like a man recalibrating something. "I didn't have another option." He looked at the artifact on the table between them, then at me, in my chair in the corner, which he'd been carefully not reacting to this entire meeting. "The dog," he said. "The dog is extremely useful," Wei Lin said, with a composure that I deeply appreciated. The Duke looked at me for 3 full seconds. I looked back. He returned to his daughter. I stayed in the room for approximately 4 seconds before concluding that I had never once in my existence stayed where I was told. I followed her. I am not a creature that stays where it's told. I'm a creature that assesses situations and makes its own operational decisions. These are different things. I moved quietly down the hallway and positioned myself just outside the reception room door, which had been left slightly open. From this angle, I could see everything without being seen. Lord Hay was exactly as the servants had described. Mid-40s, well-dressed, pleasant face, the carefully maintained kind that takes work to keep neutral. He stood in the center of the room with the ease of someone who had walked into rooms expecting things to go his way for a very long time. The gift was a jade piece. Significant. Expensive. The kind of thing you give to formalize a relationship that has already been decided. Wen Bao's secretary, a thin man in council robes, stood near the wall with a document and a small, satisfied smile. Wei Lin accepted the jade piece with both hands. Correct form. Not a single thing about her expression showed anything at all. "Lord He," Wei Lin said, her voice perfectly even, "and Lord Chancellor Wen Bao's personal secretary. I wasn't expecting either of you today." "Lord He wished to make his intentions clear before the formal announcement," the secretary said smoothly. "The Lord Chancellor sends his personal regards to the Wei household and his hopes for a happy union." Translation: This engagement has the Chancellor's backing, and any attempt to refuse it is a decision made against the second most powerful man in the Empire. Wei Lin looked at the jade piece in her hands. Then she looked at Lord He directly for the first time. "I'm honored by the gift," she said, "and by the Lord Chancellor's kind attention to my family's affairs." She set the jade piece on the table beside her with precise, controlled care. "I look forward to speaking with my father before the formal announcement. I'm sure he would want to confirm the arrangements personally." The secretary's smile stayed exactly the same. "Of course, we expect the Duke at court within the week." They stayed another 20 minutes. Wei Lin was flawless, gracious, appropriately warm, gave away absolutely nothing. When they left, she stood in the reception room and looked at the jade piece on the table for a long moment. Then she looked down and noticed me sitting next to the door. "I told you to stay in the room." I looked at the jade piece, then at her, then at the door they'd just walked out of. She looked at the ceiling for one brief second. "You were in the hallway listening to the entire thing," she said, not a question at all. She picked me up and stood there, looking at the jade piece on the table and thinking, the specific kind of thinking I'd learned to recognize, the kind where she made herself look at the full picture. All of it, including the parts that were harder to hold than the rest. "He sent his secretary," she said quietly. "That was a message. He's moving up the timeline." She was quiet for a moment. "We have less time than I thought." Yes, that was exactly right. Wen Bao was nervous. He'd sent the secretary as a show of force, which meant something had made him uncertain enough to accelerate. The prince's visit. The visit had been noticed. Someone in this household was watching, and Wen Bao now knew that Wei Lin and the prince had spoken privately. He was tightening the timeline in response, which meant he was watching the Wei household closely, which meant going to Master Chen again was complicated, and going to her father was now urgent instead of merely important. I looked up at Wei Lin's face from her arms. The jaw was set. The eyes were fixed forward on something only she could see right now. But underneath the composure, for the first time, I could feel something from her that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Closer to the recognition that the gap between what she knew and what she could do about it was real, and that it mattered, and that time was running out. 3.5 weeks. Wen Bao accelerating. The information network around her tightening. She needed more than a plan. She needed something that Wen Bao wasn't accounting for. The ember inside me had grown to almost 4% overnight. I could feel it more clearly every morning now, a steady warmth where there used to be just the faintest trace of heat. 2 more weeks, maybe less. She just needed to stay in front of this for 2 more weeks, and I was going to make sure she did. I pressed my nose against her chin, which was a new development I had not previously allowed this body to do. She startled slightly, then laughed. That quiet, surprised laugh she had, and her grip shifted from tight to something easier. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, we figure it out." "We." She'd started saying we without noticing it. I noticed. That night, someone tried to break into the Wei household for the first time. Not the garden, the house itself. I was awake. I'd been sleeping less as the power grew, the body needing less rest as it adapted, when I heard the sound, a specific sound, the kind that doesn't belong at 3 a.m. in a locked house. 2nd floor, east corridor. The servants' access stairway that ran all the way down to the back gate of the property. Someone had gotten past the gate, meaning Either the lock had been handled or someone inside had helped. The household informant Wei Lin was looking for had just made their first operational move. I went to Wei Lin's door, scratched at it once, then twice. The pattern I'd been training her on for the past week, she didn't know I was training her on it, but she'd noticed that 2 scratches meant something she should pay attention to. She was awake in seconds, which told me she'd been sleeping lightly, already on alert. The door opened. She looked at me. I looked at the east corridor, back at her. She understood immediately. She moved fast and quietly, got the small blade she kept in the bedside drawer, which I had noted with approval, and went to the window that overlooked the east corridor roof access. Whatever she saw there made her expression do something I hadn't seen it do before. Something sharp and cold and completely decided. She didn't call for help. Instead, she went back to her writing desk, wrote something quickly on 2 separate pieces of paper, and sealed them both. Then she came back to me. "I know who it is," she said very quietly. "I've suspected for 2 weeks. I just needed confirmation." She held up the 2 sealed letters. "One of these goes to Master Chen in the morning. The other, I need you to do something for me." She looked at me seriously, the way she'd been looking at me more and more lately, like the question in her eyes when she first bought me was getting closer to an answer she wasn't quite ready to name yet. "I know this sounds insane," she said, "but I think you understand more than you should. I think you have since the beginning." I looked up at her from the floor with the expression that this body defaulted to, which was, unfortunately, just a dog looking at someone. "The prince left his contact address with me, his private one, not the official channel." She held out the second letter. "If I take this through the household, whoever just accessed the east corridor may intercept it, but if you—" She stopped, reconsidered. "This is insane." I stood up, walked to her, and took the sealed letter gently from her hand. She stared at me. I walked to the window and looked back at her. Long silence. "You are the strangest dog," she said. "You are without question the strangest dog that has ever existed." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened the window. "Girl, you have absolutely no idea what you just handed a letter to, but you're getting warmer. What do you think happens when Kay finally gets enough power to act directly? Comment your prediction. I want to know what you're expecting. I delivered the letter. This requires some explanation because delivering a letter as a small white puppy with no opposable thumbs is not simple. This requires some explanation because delivering a letter when you are a small white dog with no opposable thumbs and a body that is still technically a puppy is not a straightforward operation. But I have navigated worse logistics in worse bodies. I've crossed dimensions. I've sealed rifts between worlds. I can find one prince's private residence. I left through the window Wei Lin opened, moved through 3 streets and 2 market alleys, located the address by scent. The prince had been in the Wei household enough times that I had his signature. I scratched at a side door until a very confused night servant opened it, looked at me, looked at the seal on the letter, and said nothing useful. The servant stared at me. I dropped the sealed letter at his feet. He picked it up, looked at the seal, looked at me, looked back at the seal. I turned around and went home. By the time I was back on my pillow, Wei Lin was asleep. She'd left the window unlatched. Whether that was deliberate or she'd forgotten, I chose to interpret it as deliberate. The next morning, she woke up and looked at me for a long moment before she said anything. "Did you actually go?" I looked at her. "You went," she said. "You actually went and came back." She sat up slowly. "I need to stop being surprised when you do things like that. I need to just accept that this is what you are." She was quiet for a moment, doing something with that information, filing it, letting it reshape the framework. "How?" she said finally. "Whatever you are, I'm glad you're here." I looked at her from my pillow, thought, the feeling is increasingly mutual, kept that to myself. 3 days later, 2 things happened at the same time. The first, Duke Wei arrived at the household, not with a letter, in person, which meant Wei Lin's message had landed the way she'd intended it to. The second, I woke up in the morning, reached down into the ember, and felt 5% available. Right on schedule, maybe slightly ahead. 5% of what I actually was. For context, 5% of me was approximately equivalent to every active combat mage in the Kai Empire combined, give or take. Not enough to end this cleanly on my own, but enough to do something very specific and very precise at exactly the right moment. I needed to wait for the right moment. It wasn't here yet, but it was close enough that I could feel the shape of it from where I was standing. Duke Wei was a large man with a face that was used to being listened to. He sat down across from Wei Lin in the formal sitting room. He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once, more things than he usually let show. He was angry. He was worried. He was, underneath both of those, something that Wei Lin hadn't mentioned in any of her evening conversations with me. He was a father who was looking at his daughter and seeing that something was very wrong and realizing he'd been too far away from that fact for too long. Wei Lin had told him, through the message, just enough. The artifact, Master Chen's findings, the connection to the council. Not Wen Bao's name, not yet. Just enough to establish that someone had been working around him inside his own household and that his daughter had been the target. Duke Wei sat forward. "Show me everything," he said. His voice had changed, no longer the formal register, something more direct underneath it. She showed him everything. The artifact, Master Chen's copied report connecting the cases to council-linked practitioners. The timeline, 8 months of coordinated activity that had moved around the Duke's own decisions without him seeing a single hand involved. He sat very still through all of it. The face didn't move much, but I was watching his hands. They tightened on his knee about halfway through, stayed tight. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Who?" One word, not a question, a requirement. Wei Lin looked at him steadily. "If I tell you the name, I need you to promise me something first." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. This was new from her, and he was adjusting to it. "I need you to not move immediately, not confront, not withdraw, not do anything that signals you know, because whoever this is has been watching this household. Any sudden change in your behavior tells them the information has moved." Duke Wei studied his daughter for what felt like a full minute. "You've been running this yourself," he said. Not accusatory, more like a man recalibrating something. "I didn't have another option." He looked at the artifact on the table between them, then at me, in my chair in the corner, which he'd been carefully not reacting to this entire meeting. "The dog," he said. "The dog is extremely useful," Wei Lin said, with a composure that I deeply appreciated. The Duke looked at me for 3 full seconds. I looked back. He returned to his daughter. It moved. Something passed across it that was very fast and very controlled. Not panic. Closer to the recognition that a piece he thought was secured had just moved in the wrong direction. He looked across the room. Not at Wei Lin. At the corridor where Prince Lan Chen had disappeared toward the Emperor's private receiving room. He understood. He stood very still for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward that corridor. And that was the moment I'd been waiting for. I was out of the basket before Wei Lin could react, moving through the gathering crowd, low and fast, through a gap between 2 officials, past a table with documents on it. I had 5%. I needed less than 1 for this. The most delicate, precise thing I had done since arriving in this body. I found the corridor entrance before Wen Bao reached it and sat down directly in the center of his path. Small white dog. Very deliberate placement. He looked down at me. A small white dog sitting in the corridor of the Imperial Court. Not remarkable, except that the dog was looking at him with an expression that no small white dog should have. He stopped walking, looked down, then looked more carefully. The way you look at something when the first look told you something was wrong with it. I looked at him. I let exactly 1% through, not the same 1% I'd used in the garden. Something more specific, more personal. The part of what I was that existed before this world had language or gods or empires or chancellors. The oldest part. It doesn't translate into language or strategy or any of the systems this world runs on. It predates all of them. It doesn't need to translate. Wen Bao looked at me for 4 seconds. He was old. He was experienced. He had spent 40 years reading rooms and people and situations and knowing exactly how to move in them. In those 40 years, He had encountered most things that could be encountered in a life spent at the center of power, not something like this. He knew he should keep moving. He knew the corridor was the only option. He knew exactly how many seconds he had before the information finished moving down that hallway. He also knew, with the particular certainty that I had just handed him directly, that the small white dog sitting in his path was not something he was going to step over. He stood there in the corridor with that knowledge and made no move to step around me. 7 seconds passed, then 8, then 9. The Emperor's receiving room door opened at the end of the corridor. An attendant appeared, spoke to someone inside, and then came back out. The prince followed, and behind the prince, the imperial seal on a document in the attendant's hand. Done. Moving. Sealed. Wen Bao stood in the corridor and watched all of this happen from 20 feet away, perfectly still, with the document moving away from him. He was still standing in the corridor when the prince returned to the gathering hall, when Duke Wei appeared in the doorway looking for his daughter. When Wei Lin herself came to the corridor entrance and stopped, seeing both of them, Wen Bao standing still, me sitting in front of him, the document sealed and in motion, somewhere behind them all. Wen Bao looked across the gathering at Wei Lin. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, and neither of them needed to. He was old enough and experienced enough to understand exactly what had just happened. The information was with the Emperor, sealed under imperial acknowledgement, withdrawable only by the Emperor now. Everything he'd built around this situation, the 8 months, the compound, the garden visits, Lord Hay, the arranged match, all of it had just become something the Emperor was going to read about. He looked down at me one more time. Something crossed his face that was not quite any single emotion, something older than strategy. Then he turned and walked back toward the main hall. Steady, controlled, not running. Wen Bao had not survived 40 years by running from things, but he was no longer walking toward anything he'd planned for today. Wei Lin picked me up. She was breathing carefully, controlled, held together. "That was you," Wei Lin said quietly, her voice careful and steady. "In the corridor, blocking him. That was you making that choice." I looked at her. "You stopped him long enough." She held me against her, which I have officially stopped having opinions about. "You knew exactly how long it needed to be." Her face was pressed against the top of my head, briefly, just briefly, not visible to anyone in the hallway. "Okay," she said, pulling back. "Okay, we're okay." "We." She still said we without thinking about it, which she had been doing for weeks now, and which I had stopped pretending not to notice. The aftermath moved quickly. The investigation records reached the Emperor that afternoon. By evening, 2 council members had been called for separate private audiences. By the following morning, Lord Chancellor Wen Bao had submitted a request to step back from his official duties for health reasons. It was the cleanest exit available to him. The Emperor had given him that option rather than a public trial, which was its own form of information. Either the Emperor preferred stability over spectacle, or there were parts of those records that the Empire wasn't ready to have fully public yet. Possibly both. Lord Hay's family withdrew the engagement proposal the same afternoon. No explanation given. The formal announcement at the autumn court was never made. 3 days after the gathering, Duke Wei stood in Wei Lin's sitting room and looked at his daughter for an unusually long moment before speaking. "The procedural challenge," he said. "The records, the letter to the prince, the public presence at the gathering." He paused. "When did you plan all of this?" "The night after Rui Yue told me about the 8 months, Wei Lin said. "You were 17. "I am 17, she said. "I'm still 17. The Duke was quiet. Then he said carefully, "Your mother would have—" "I know," Wei Lin said. "You said that before." He looked at the window, at the garden where the whole thing had started, where an artifact had sat in the grass for 1 night before a 6-week-old puppy carried it inside and put it under a pillow. He looked at me one final time. I looked back at him. "What is that dog, actually?" he said. Wei Lin didn't hesitate. "Mine," she said, simply. The Duke left. Wei Lin sat in the quiet after he was gone, and I sat on the floor in front of her chair the way I had been doing since the 2nd week. not on my pillow across the room, but here, close, without needing to justify the logistics of it. "How?" she said. I looked up at her from the floor in front of her chair where I'd been sitting for most of the past 10 weeks without making decisions about it. "I know you're not a dog." She looked at me steadily, those violet eyes that had been seeing something since the first day in the market. "I don't know what you are. I'm not sure I'm ready to know yet." She paused. "Is that all right?" I held her gaze, thought about thousands of years, about all the things I'd been called and feared and avoided, about a village at the foot of a mountain with laundry drying in the wind, about a pink pillow with ruffles, about a girl who talked to me in the dark because she had nowhere else to put her honesty, about the way she'd said "we" without noticing it, about the way she'd pressed her face into the top of my head in a corridor when she thought no one could see, about the fact that I had, at some point in the last 10 weeks, stopped calculating whether staying here was strategically advantageous and simply been here. I wagged my tail. Not the body doing it independently this time, not reflex, not 6 weeks of puppy instinct. That was a deliberate choice. That was me. Wei Lin smiled. The real one, not the court smile, not the composed one, the one that came out when the servants had gone and it was just her and me and the dark outside the window. "Okay," she said. "Okay. We figure the rest out later." Later, as if there was going to be a later. As if 10 weeks had turned into something with a future attached to it. I suppose 10 weeks in one place had turned into something with a future attached to it. That was new. I was choosing not to examine it too closely. My power was still 5%. It would grow, slowly, steadily, the way it had been growing since the beginning. Eventually, it would be 10. Then 20. Then, something this body and this world would need to make real decisions about. Decisions I hadn't made yet, but could feel waiting somewhere ahead. But right now, it was 5%. And right now, a girl sat in front of me, shoes off, hair coming loose from its court arrangement, tired and relieved, and more real than she ever allowed herself to be in front of anyone who was actually watching her closely and keeping track. And right now, this specific moment, this room, this girl with her shoes off looking at the window, was enough, completely enough, for now. Whatever came next, whatever was moving in the East Wing, whatever Wenbao's exit left behind in the council's structure, whatever the Emperor had read in those records and decided to do quietly, it was going to find us together. A girl who had been alone for a long time, and whatever I was, standing between her and everything that hadn't been dealt with yet. Which was fine. I have dealt with considerably worse situations than this one. I had time, and time, across thousands of years, has always been my most reliable resource. If you made it all the way to part 4, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment from the whole story. And if you want to see what happens when Kay's power keeps growing, you know what to do.